Because we're talking about expectations, and I think it's a great segue into the next topic of, yes, let's get a little political and let's talk about the Donald. Yes, Donald Trump. We couldn't go too long without talking about Donald Trump. Hey, look, let me mention once again, this is like our little disclaimer. We are not political commentators. We are not experts on these situations or anything like that. We simply see everyday situations and draw metaphors from them. We like to take lessons and learnings from everyday events. So we may not know all the details. We also don't know outcomes yet. But a few weeks ago at the time of this recording, Trump's, country club, or his house at his country club, whatever it is there at Mar-a-Lago, was raided by the FBI. And there's all this controversy of Trump taking classified documents. And I was wondering, like, how can we talk about this? How can we learn without it being too political? And I really felt that this is actually a challenge that a lot of people, especially people that are hired for, how would I say it? Let's say more thinking roles, right? That they're people that are employed for their brains rather than their hands, so to speak, right? And not that people that work with their hands don't use their brains. I know that they use them a lot better than what I could. But people that are employed more for their thoughts rather than what they're working on, and there can be quite a complication of what belongs to me and what belongs to the company, right? Intellectual property. It's a big challenge. Because we can go and we can create something, and under the letter of the law, if we have been employed by an organization, then technically whatever we create with that organization belongs to them. Obviously, there is precedence for the president to be able to take some of their documents and stuff like that. There's also apparently this precedent that says that the Trump can declassify something in a moment, and that sounds all crazy. But anyway, but there's all this drama of Trump now leaving, causing all this drama because he's taken stuff that he believes belongs to him, but the government believes still belongs to the White House. Dr. Rod, what would you say to a leader that is creating things and developing things in an organization, in a partnership or whatever, but upon exit, they feel like there's some value that they can take? What would your advice be to them?
Well, first of all, find out what authority you have to do it. So make sure you know. And look, for many people, that's going to be in their contract. A lot of organisations will actually have policies on intellectual property. I've spent a long time in the university sector. Every university I've worked in had a policy on intellectual property and also on copyright. And there are all sorts of eventualities which were anticipated in those policies. And there are opportunities from time to time to negotiate with your university in terms of sharing the proceeds of royalties on inventions and so on. So know what the policy is, know what your contract says. That's really important, I believe, because if you didn't like your contract or if you didn't like the policy in the first place, you shouldn't have joined that organisation anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is be tidy. Make sure that on exit, everything is tidy.
That's
and
good.
That you don't have boxes and boxes of records which you may be entitled to or you may not be entitled to. And I think one of the issues that has dogged President Trump, of course, is that perhaps he didn't leave the White House as tidily as he could have. But
I don't think he did anything as tidily as you could. Did he? he likes to create a little bit of chaos around him.
You just need to be, I would say, and perhaps, in his case, he wasn't actually expecting to have to leave the White House as soon as he did. And maybe, things weren't as carefully sorted as they ought to have been. That's just abstracting altogether from whatever political overtones there might be in terms of that raid. But look, the general advice I would give is make sure you know what you are allowed to take with you upon exit, and do everything you possibly can to make sure that it is a physically tidy exit.
That's really good. Now, it was really good. Obviously, your history is in universities, and as a lecturer in universities, as a dean, as a vice president, as well as a CEO of like higher education institutions, you've been in every gamut of higher education institutions. You have obviously developed a lot of knowledge, during that time, and you did your research and you prepared for lectures and stuff like that, presented courses and lessons and stuff. And it's very similar to obviously, I'm a teacher and very, very similar. I create content, research, and create educational material and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, like you mentioned, when you create, I'm assuming when you create lectures and everything like that, they are fully the asset of the university, but you're still got your knowledge and you've created models and things like that. How do you, with integrity, take the knowledge that you have, because obviously it's your knowledge, you can't get rid of it. How do you separate and do it with integrity of taking the knowledge that you have and the things you've developed, I suppose the concepts you've developed, but still leaving the assets that do actually belong to that organization?
Well, look, one of the easy ways, of course, you're still carrying around all that knowledge in your head. That's what we economists call intellectual capital. You've still got that, and more than likely, your next employer is employing you partly because of that intellectual capital or human capital that is part of who you are. But what you wouldn't do, of course, is to take with you any of the, say, the learning resources that you had prepared while you were with your former employer. So, that would normally be a breach of copyright, because there is a distinction usually between intellectual property and copyright. Universities tend to be pretty good in terms of, say, if you write a book, for example, they don't usually ask you for a share in the royalties or anything like that. So you get to keep that, and you get to take the book with you, so to speak, when you leave. But these days, certainly in the context of Australia, if you're lecturing in a university, you do produce a lot of learning materials. That always remains the property, the intellectual property of the university, unless there's some special arrangement. And most universities do make allowance for special arrangements. And that's why I say be absolutely clear, what you're actually entitled to and what the university or your employer more generally is actually entitled to hang on to. And look, this can be a big issue, say in a company which is developing a brand new technology or highly innovative. So the high tech companies, for example, where they're creating software and so on, there's a lot of intellectual property involved here. So it is really important that everybody knows where they stand. But look, in my experience, universities tend to be really good with the whole issue of copyright and intellectual property. The door is always open for negotiation as well. I just think you need to make sure every card is on the table and you're prepared to talk.
So let me shift it to the other way, because we're talking about us as leaders leaving an organization and what we have the right to take. Let's shift it the other way as how can we allow someone to leave well with IP? So, for example, some of my past, and you've mentored me through a lot of my exits, good and bad. There have been times where as I leave, my partner or whatever that I've been working with or under has kind of threatened and said, well, you're not allowed to do anything in that field or whatever. Now, obviously there are your non-compete clauses that people have in their contracts and everything like that. But how can we, because I actually felt in that time, it's like, well, I'm a coach. Like, I came in with knowledge and I came out with knowledge. Yes, I came out with some knowledge, but I also contributed knowledge, as well as it's no different from me just going to a seminar and learning knowledge and then going and reapplying. Like, that's what we do as coaches. We, coaches and teachers, we absorb information and then package it up in a presentable way to a new audience, to people that we believe that'll help. I couldn't not do that, and obviously it's my livelihood and everything like that, and I felt that was not to be petty about it, like unfair, but obviously it was. I don't feel it was godly. How do we, while still protecting ourselves, because we have we have a responsibility for ourselves, our organization, and everything like that. How do we allow someone to leave with some IP so that we can still bless them on their way without restricting them from then pursuing, onto their future things while still protecting ourselves?
That's a pretty difficult one. And I think in a lot of cases when the departures are unhappy ones and unhealthy ones, it's because, in a sense, rules have been made up as we go. And I know, we don't want to speak about specific cases, but I do know of cases where there wasn't a proper agreement in place right from the outset that actually made it quite explicit about how intellectual property was going to be handled. In a business such as your own, where you're involved in mentoring and coaching and training, you are your intellectual property to a large extent. So you're absorbing information and new knowledge all the time. You package it up in a unique way and then you present it. And that walks with you. So it's very difficult for, say, a partner or an employer to say you can't take that with you because it's who you are.
Yep.
I do think, on the other hand, though, that to the extent that you've created, say, learning resources, these might be videos, they might be written material, I think that stays behind.
Yep.
And that I think is a fairly clear-cut distinction. But a partner, an employer, actually doesn't own you. They don't own what's in your head. They don't own your uniqueness, which makes you successful in any particular context. And the other thing too is there needs, I believe, to be generosity on either side. And perhaps I'm talking about an ideal world because where people are hurt, they don't feel like being generous. But as Christians, we need to take a leaf out of God's book, as it were. He was most generous toward us because he sacrificed his son, Jesus Christ, so that we might not perish but have everlasting life, and in fact that we might have a life worth living this side of our earthly grave. And so generosity, I think, is a principle.
Not that we deserved it either.
No, that's right. We didn't deserve it. And look, I think if we can build into business culture the idea of generosity, then we can overcome a lot of these negative departures. But it's not easy because both parties have got to be willing to be generous. My own view is that if I had a breakup from a partnership in business, and even if I knew the other person was taking intellectual property that was mine, I'm confident that God will still get me through, even if it does some damage to my business. I don't think I would be prepared to sacrifice, say, Christian love and charity and generosity in order to preserve what I perceived as something that belonged to me. Now, I don't believe we should allow ourselves to be like a doorstep, so to speak, a doormat, I should say. But I do think we should have confidence that God will look after us, no matter what
100%.
the circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, and forgiveness goes a long way. And obviously in our program, we spend a lot of time talking about forgiveness, especially at the beginning with these sorts of challenges, because whether we are the one exiting or someone is leaving us, there has to be some forgiveness there, and we have to be the bigger man. But we really do.
Yes.
God has called us, whether it's right or not. We have to be generous. We have to be loving. We have to be caring. And like I kind of chimed in before, not because they deserve it, not because God didn't give us because we deserved it. No, He gave us anyway. He gave us Jesus, and He's always forgiven us.
That's
and
right.
so yeah, it's really important that we exercise that forgiveness. And one of the keys that I believe to forgiving someone is being able to bless someone. It kind of forces us to act out, because obviously, like James says, faith without works is dead. We can say, I've forgiven, but unless you actually, is there going to be an act, a physical act that you're going to do that can display? Now, it doesn't mean that you're generous and you let them walk away with those resources, that means your forgiveness is done. No, there's usually a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah.
But it's a beginning of it. It's like, you know what, I'm doing my part, because I believe that out of all the exits that I've had, the one thing that I can contest to, whether I contributed to the bad exit or not, I can stand here honestly, and you can hold me accountable to this, because you've been in every one of these situations. I have always held my integrity. Always make sure that I maintain my integrity with the exit, and I think that God bless it. Like you're saying, look, whether you miss out on that or whatever, like God will protect you. Yeah, like we speak about David. David could have killed Saul in that cave, but he didn't. And he said, no, it's for God to judge between you and me. It's not me to try to claim my throne or whatever. It's God will judge between you and I. So, hey, you just watched an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you'd like to see the full episodes, check out our YouTube channel and consider subscribing.